What if I told you that an isolated tribe in Mali knew details about invisible stars centuries before the invention of the telescope, and that this truth was hidden so that you would never believe in the power of your own ancestry? Today I'm going to show you how the Dogons mapped the cosmos with an accuracy that NASA only confirmed in the 1970s, proving that what the West calls progress is just a lag behind African spiritual technology. We will delve into knowledge that has been labeled as impossible to keep you disconnected from the human mind's ability to access the universe without machines. If you want to understand how modern science is being forced to validate what our ancestors already mastered, leave a like and subscribe. Get ready to explode your definition of knowledge and awaken what they tried to erase from your memory. Let's do it. How is it possible that such a rich and spiritual civilization has been ignored for so long? The truth is that African spiritual traditions are a treasure trove of ancient wisdom that predates any monotheistic religion. Before biblical scriptures were compiled, African peoples already possessed a complex cosmology that connected the human to the divine in ways that would challenge even the most skeptical minds. Imagine an era when stars were seen not just as distant points of light but as spiritual guides, where ancestors spoke through the wind and waters carried messages from the gods. Such beliefs were not the result of ignorance, but of a deep observation and interaction with the natural and spiritual world. The facts reveal that this rich tapestry of beliefs, rituals, and mythologies was systematically disregarded and labeled as primitive by the colonizers. Still, these practices survived resiliently, preserved in the songs, dances, and tales passed down from generation to generation. What few realize is that, behind the ritualistic dances and offerings, there is a philosophy of life that sees the universe as an interconnected web, where each being, human or not, plays a crucial role. It turns out that Africa is home to a diversity of spiritual practices, each with its own gods and spirits, but all sharing the understanding that life does not end with physical death. Ancestors live among us, guiding and protecting their descendants. This concept of ancestry offers not only spiritual continuity, but also a cultural and familial link that transcends time. Documents prove that African civilizations, such as those of ancient Egypt, Nubia, and Ethiopia, strongly influenced the religions we know today. For example, the concept of an afterlife, central to Christian beliefs, has its roots in African practices of mummification and preparation for the afterlife spiritual journey. Analysis indicates that African oral traditions, rich in symbolism and teachings, are some of the longest-lasting forms of cultural preservation, resisting centuries of oppression and attempts at eradication. Research demonstrates that the African belief system not only survived, but also directly influenced Afro-diasporic religions, such as Candomblé and Santeria, which flourished in the Americas. These traditions show the adaptability and resilience of African spiritual practices, which continue to offer solace, direction, and meaning to millions of people around the world. So the question is, what stops us from recognizing and celebrating this rich spiritual heritage that not only precedes but also enriches our understanding of the divine? Reality shows that long before the emergence of monotheistic religions, the African continent was already the scene of a rich spiritual tapestry, where gods walked among men. African deities known as Orixás, Voduns, and Inquisis represented not only figures of worship, but cosmic forces intrinsically linked to nature and everyday life. The Orixás of the Yoruba people, for example, are a vivid expression of this complex spirituality. Shango, the powerful lord of thunder, is not only a god of lightning, but also a representation of justice, reminding us that order in the cosmos and society must be maintained. He is often syncretized with Saint Jerome in the Christian tradition, reflecting the resilience and adaptability of African beliefs in the face of colonial impositions. Meanwhile, Oshun, the goddess of fresh waters and love, is venerated as a deity of fertility and prosperity. Its association with Nossa Senhora da Conceição in the Catholic Church reveals a fusion that allowed these ancestral beliefs to survive the impact of colonialism. Water, Oxum's element, is considered sacred and essential for life, and its rites often involve offerings in rivers and waterfalls, places where it is believed that the goddess manifests her presence and grants blessings. Ogun, in turn, is the warrior Oryxa who opens the paths, and his influence goes beyond battle. He is a patron of technologies and metalworking, symbolizing innovation and the search for progress. In the diaspora, it is often associated with St. George, highlighting the cultural fusion that allowed these ancient gods to continue to be venerated in new contexts. Yemanja, the majestic queen of the oceans, is celebrated in festivals that attract thousands of devotees to the beaches, where offerings are thrown into the sea in search of protection, healing, and love. Syncretized with Our Lady of Navigators, she personifies motherhood and protection, reminding us that the oceans are a source of life and sustenance. Among the Fon peoples of the Kingdom of Dahomey, Vodans played a similar role. Each Vodan was responsible for an aspect of life and the universe, and its priests were guardians of profound knowledge about natural and spiritual forces. Meanwhile, the Bantu people revered the Inquises, who, like the Oryxas and Vodans, were manifestations of the forces of nature and ancestors. Research shows that, regardless of name or form, these deities share the common characteristic of being intrinsically linked to nature and community. They are not seen as distant entities, but as an integral part of everyday life, shaping the lives and destiny of human beings. The priests and priestesses, true scholars, dedicated themselves to the study of stars, plants, lunar cycles, and music, preserving and transmitting an ancestral wisdom that defied the passage of time. Evidence suggests that these spiritual traditions, with their deep respect for nature and ancestors, offer a worldview where the divine is not separated from the physical world. Instead, it permeates all things, linking the past, present, and future in a complex, interconnected web. The question that arises is, how can we, in our search for meaning, ignore such a rich and profound spiritual heritage that continues to resonate in the religious practices of millions around the world? The Book of Enoch, a powerful and controversial apocryphal text, offers a perspective that challenges traditional narratives in the canonical Bible. While many know Enoch as the patriarch who walked with God, few know about the revelations contained in the Dead Sea Scrolls. In this book, Enoch introduces us to the Watchers, 200 angels who descended on Mount Hermon with intentions that would change the course of human history forever. These celestial beings, when uniting with human women, gave rise to the Nephilim, giants endowed with skills and knowledge far beyond what humanity at that time could understand. The truth is that the Book of Enoch details how these Watchers transmitted forbidden knowledge to humans, such as advanced metallurgy and astrology, skills that radically transformed civilization. The impact of these revelations was so profound that humans began to build weapons of war and observe the stars in a way that altered their societies at an unnatural pace. The canonical Bible mentions the Nephilim briefly in Genesis, suggesting that the flood would have erased this lineage. However, the Book of Enoch, along with the Book of Jubilees and other apocryphal texts, presents a divergent narrative. They claim that not all descendants of the Nephilim perished in the waters. Some survived and dispersed, taking with them knowledge that could alter the balance of power between nations. The reality shows that many of these descendants found refuge in Africa, a continent that has always been at the center of spiritual and historical mysteries. Historical records show that certain African civilizations, such as those of ancient Egypt and Nubia, possessed astronomical and metallurgical knowledge that defied the conventional chronology of human development. Could part of this advancement be attributed to influences from the Nephilim? Research shows that monuments and megalithic structures found in various parts of Africa, such as the Napta Playa complex, have precise astronomical alignments that suggest an advanced understanding of the stars. Evidence indicates that African oral tradition preserved, in a codified manner, the stories of these interactions between humans and celestial beings. In some cultures, there are legends about giants who walked among men and taught extraordinary skills. These accounts, often dismissed as myths, may be echoes of a forgotten truth, a truth that apocryphal texts like the Book of Enoch attempt to reveal. Analysis indicates that the presence of the Nephilim and the Watchers may be intertwined with the very roots of African spiritual practices, which have always emphasized an intimate relationship with the cosmos and natural forces. While the world modern people tend to see these texts as mere fables, for many African peoples, they represent a tangible connection to a past where the divine and the human intertwined in ways that are impossible to ignore. History reveals that Enoch's narrative, with its wealth of details about fallen angels and giants, was systematically removed from official scriptures in councils such as Nicaea, where the Church decided which texts would be considered canonical. The exclusion of the Book of Enoch from Western scripture may have been an attempt to hide a part of the past that challenged the new religious and political order. But why was this story, so full of mystery and power, relegated to oblivion? Could the truth about the Watchers and the Nephilim be a key to understanding the relationship between human beings and the divine? Which begs the question, what other secrets are hidden in the shadows of history waiting to be revealed? The truth is that there is an African god whose powerful and influential presence echoed so strongly throughout ancient cultures that his memory needed to be erased to ensure the supremacy of a new religious order. This deity, whose name has been lost to the sands of time, was part of a pantheon that for thousands of years had guided entire civilizations through complex spiritual practices and rituals that connected the human with the divine, in ways that defied later imposed conventions. The facts reveal that this deity, venerated in several regions of Africa, had such a deep-rooted cult that his influence threatened the rise of monotheism promoted by Yahweh among the Hebrews. Historical records show that, in the regions where this god was worshipped, there were practices of healing, purification, and communication with the supernatural that long preceded Hebrew traditions. It turns out that the Bible itself, by insisting on Yahweh's exclusivity, unintentionally denounces the presence of other gods. The phrase, "Thou shalt have no other gods before me," not only acknowledges the existence of other deities, but also reveals the urgent need to suppress the worship of these gods, to consolidate a new spiritual hegemony. Studies indicate that this forgotten god could be part of a spiritual tradition deeply rooted in practices that included divination and direct contact with spirits. These practices, often considered pagan or demonized by new religions, were in fact expressions of an intimate connection with the natural and cosmic forces that governed the universe. Evidence indicates that the influence of this god was so vast that in several African cultures, his rituals and symbols persisted in a veiled manner, often camouflaged under the cloak of Christian saints or Islamic figures, a strategy of syncretism that allowed the survival of their traditions under colonial and religious oppression. What few realize is that the attempt to erase the memory of this deity was not limited to the scriptures. History reveals that the colonization and expansion of Christianity in African lands was accompanied by systematic efforts to destroy temples, burn sacred texts, and suppress any form of worship that did not align with the new order. But even in the face of this relentless repression, the memory of this god found refuge in the songs, stories, and daily rituals that continued to be practiced in secret, passing from generation to generation like an invisible thread that wove cultural resistance. Reality shows that by acknowledging the existence of other gods, the Bible inadvertently illuminates a past where the divine was multifaceted and deeply rooted in everyday life. And now, in a world increasingly open to interreligious dialogue and the search for authentic spiritual roots, the question that arises is, are we ready to rediscover and honor this forgotten God, whose presence continues to silently resonate through the spiritual practices that have survived the test of time? How is it possible that Africa, a continent so central to the biblical narrative, has been systematically erased from its history? Reality shows that the choices made by the compilers of the scriptures were not random or innocent. When we analyze biblical events, it is clear that Africa played a crucial role. Abraham sought refuge in Egypt during a famine, Moses grew up in Pharaoh's court, Joseph became a figure of power in the same country, and even Jesus found refuge in African lands. The Queen of Sheba, whose kingdom is believed to have been located in what is now Ethiopia, traveled to meet Solomon, bringing wealth and wisdom that challenged Jerusalem. These events are not mere details, but integral parts of the sacred narrative. It turns out that over the centuries, Africa has been relegated to a supporting role in Western scriptures. The facts reveal that the Book of Enoch, for example, remained complete only in the Ethiopian tradition. This apocryphal text, rejected by ecclesiastical councils as heretical, contained knowledge and stories that could empower those who were not part of the dominant group. The exclusion of these texts suggests a deliberate attempt to centralize spiritual and political power by limiting it to only a specific lineage or geography. This was essential to justify the subsequent colonization and domination over peoples who, if recognized as having a legitimate connection with the divine, could not be subjugated so easily. What few realize is that African spiritual traditions have always maintained an intrinsic relationship with the divine, which did not depend on written texts, but rather on a rich oral tradition and ritualistic practice. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church has preserved the Book of Enoch, keeping alive an alternative perspective on biblical events that the Western world has preferred to ignore. Analysis indicates that this preservation was not only cultural but also a form of resistance against the dominant narrative that sought to erase African history. The reality is that recognizing the central role of Africa in biblical accounts means admitting that African lineages have a direct and inalienable connection with the sacred. This not only challenges the narrative of a chosen people, but also calls into question the historical justifications for slavery and colonization. Documents prove that this spiritual connection was often diminished or reinterpreted to serve colonial interests, which saw Africa as a land to be conquered and explored, and not as a cradle of wisdom and spirituality. Evidence indicates that African spirituality, far from being a mere background, has always been one of the pillars of the biblical narrative. The Bible mentions Ethiopia several times, not just as a distant nation, but as a place of great spiritual significance. In Psalm 68:31, for example, there is a prophecy that Ethiopia would turn to God, hinting at a divine connection that transcends geographic boundaries. History reveals that the erasure of Africa from Scripture was not just an act of omission, but a conscious strategy to control the spiritual narrative and, by extension, cultural and political power. The question that arises is, to what extent are we willing to re-examine these ancient narratives and recognize Africa as a vital source of spiritual wisdom that continues to influence the world to this day? The griots of West Africa, true living libraries, are the guardians of the history and culture of their people, preserving a rich oral tradition that stands the test of time. They tell stories of ancestors who not only walked these lands, but who, according to their narratives, descended from the stars, bringing with them extraordinary knowledge. For many, these stories are not mere myths, but records of real events, passed down from generation to generation with an accuracy that defies written history. When one examines the Book of Enoch, which presents the Watchers, celestial beings who taught cosmic secrets to humans, and compares it with the narratives of the griots, the similarities are uncanny. The truth is that across the African continent, monuments like the pyramids of Egypt and megalithic structures at sites like Nabta Playa not only defy official historical chronology, but also suggest astronomical and mathematical knowledge that should not have existed at that time. The stories of the griot tell of giants who ruled before the great floods, an echo of the descriptions of the Nephilim in the Book of Enoch. These giants, or superior beings, not only ruled but also shared profound knowledge about nature and the cosmos. The reality shows that many of these narratives are not just isolated legends, but part of a shared cultural memory that insists on its truth. What few realize is that these African oral traditions are as accurate as any written text, keeping intact the essence of the events they report. The astronomical systems mentioned by the griots, which align with modern discoveries, point to a civilization that had an advanced understanding of the cosmos. This wisdom, according to the stories, was not a slow and gradual achievement of humanity, but rather a gift from the Watchers, or the celestial beings who descended to Earth. Evidence indicates that African traditions, when describing the Watchers under different names, support a narrative of contact between humans and beings from other worlds. Records of these interactions were not only preserved, but also celebrated in songs, dances, and rituals that continue to be practiced today. Documents prove that these traditions play a vital role in the cultural identity of African people, offering not just a glimpse of a distant past, but also a living connection with the divine. It turns out that official academia often ignores or downplays these traditions, preferring explanations that fit established narratives. However, the richness of detail and consistency of the griots' stories indicate a source of knowledge that defies convention. Studies indicate that the resilience of these traditions is not just a matter of faith, but also a testament to the depth of human understanding of the cosmos and their place in it. History reveals that, while the modern world seeks answers in the stars, the griots already have them stored in their stories and songs. The question is, are we ready to listen and learn from these memory keepers, whose truths can redefine our understanding of the past and future? What few recognize is that, even in the face of the brutality and horror of the transatlantic slave trade, unprecedented spiritual resistance flourished in the New World. Reality shows that enslaved Africans, deprived of their lands and languages, found ingenious ways to preserve their cultural and spiritual identities through religious syncretism. This strategy was not a mere forced adaptation, but a deliberate tactic of survival and resistance. By adopting Catholic saints as fronts for their Orixás, Voduns, and Inquises, they created a form of worship that could be practiced under the watchful eyes of the colonizers without arousing suspicion. Zango, Oshun, and Ogum, among other deities, found new expressions and continued to be revered under Christian guises, allowing African spiritual traditions to take root and perpetuate themselves in the Americas. This fusion gave rise to religions such as Candomblé in Brazil, Santeria in Cuba, Voodoo in Haiti, and Umbanda, each incorporating African, indigenous, and European elements. Documents prove that these religions not only perpetuated ancestral practices, but also enriched them, creating a vibrant and unique spirituality that continues to play a crucial role in the cultural identity of Afro-descendant communities. In Brazil, for example, Candomblé celebrates a pantheon of orishas who govern aspects of nature and human life, with rituals involving music, dance, and offerings. These rituals, in addition to being religious practices, function as acts of cultural resistance, affirming Afro-Brazilian identity in a world that often tries to erase it. It turns out that the choice of specific saints to represent the Orixás was not random. The syncretism was carefully planned to ensure that the characteristics of the saints corresponded to those of the Orixás. For example, Saint Jerome, known for his erudition and strong temperament, was associated with Shango, the Orixá of thunder and justice. Likewise, Our Lady of Aparecida, with her maternal and protective image, was identified with Oxum, the goddess of love and fresh waters. This strategy allowed Africans to continue practicing their religion under a layer of Christianity, deceiving the colonizers while keeping the essence of their beliefs alive. Evidence suggests that this spiritual resistance not only challenged colonial oppression, but also created a bridge between the past and the present, preserving a heritage that has suffered countless attempts at eradication. Religious ceremonies and festivals such as Carnival in Brazil are examples of how these traditions have intertwined with local culture, creating new forms of cultural expression that continue to celebrate the rich diversity and resilience of people of African descent. History reveals that African spiritual practices, far from being eradicated, were transformed and adapted, serving as a form of resistance and resilience that defied attempts at cultural erasure. This spiritual survival, hidden beneath the surface of dominant religion, is a testament to the power and persistence of a people who, even in the most adverse circumstances, refused to be silenced. And the question is, what can we learn from this tenacity and spiritual creativity that continues to inspire and guide millions around the world? The belief that the Watchers will return is not mere superstition, but an expectation rooted in the heart of many African traditions. These celestial beings, who once walked among men, shared secrets and were punished for it, have left a legacy that transcends time. In several parts of the continent, celestial signs are interpreted as messages from these ancient masters. Eclipses, planetary alignments, and other natural phenomena are seen not just as astronomical events, but as codes sent by those who observe us from spheres beyond our understanding. The reality shows that the Book of Enoch, a text often overlooked by Western religious traditions, it is revered in several African communities for its rich narrative about the Watchers. This book suggests that there will be a time when lost knowledge will be recovered, and this time is prophesied in the stars. For the ancients, the heavens were an open book, where the destiny and wisdom of the gods were read. Today, this celestial reading remains a vital practice in many African cultures, where griots and priests still consult the stars for guidance and prophecy. What few realize is that this knowledge is not just about predictions of future events, but also a map to rediscover the lost connection between the human and the divine. In ancient times, many African civilizations had astronomers who, without telescopes, mapped constellations and predicted events with an accuracy that still amazes us today. Nabta Playa, for example, is an archaeological site that predates Stonehenge and shows a deep understanding of stellar movements. This astronomical knowledge was inseparable from religiosity, as it was believed that the gods walked among the stars and that celestial signs were expressions of their will. The facts reveal that, while the modern world seeks answers in the exact sciences, African traditions maintain a holistic approach, where science and spirituality are two sides of the same coin. When an eclipse occurs, it is not simply an event to be admired, but a time of reflection and prayer, an opportunity to connect with what has been and what is to come. These ancient practices, which survived colonization and the imposition of foreign religions, are re-emerging with renewed strength in a world desperately searching for meaning and connection. It turns out that this resurgence is no coincidence. African spiritual masters assert that we are living in the prelude of a new awakening, a time when suppressed wisdom will once again be accessible to those who seek to understand its true origin and purpose. As the stars continue to shine like eternal guides, we are invited to remember and re-evaluate our place in the universe, not just as passive spectators, but as active participants in a story unfolding beyond our immediate understanding. So the question is, are we ready to decipher these signs and embrace the ancient wisdom that invites us to see beyond what is visible? Have you ever wondered how it is possible to feel an inexplicable connection to a culture or spirituality that you have never directly experienced? The answer may lie in something deeper than simple cultural memory. Studies indicate that epigenetics, the science that studies how life experiences can influence genetic expression, is beginning to reveal a truth that African traditions have always recognized: the continued presence of ancestors in our lives. These are not just metaphors or spiritual beliefs. It is an emerging science that suggests that trauma and significant experiences can be passed on biologically from generation to generation. The truth is that this theory is not just speculation. Documents prove that traumatic events, such as slavery and colonization, can leave marks on the DNA of descendants, influencing their emotional and physical health. However, it is not just traumas that are transmitted. The spiritual forces, skills, and knowledge acquired can also be part of this genetic legacy. When a person feels a strong emotional response to the sound of African drums or finds comfort in ancient spiritual practices, it may be the manifestation of a dormant memory, an innate connection that transcends time and space. Evidence indicates that the lineages that carry the memory of the Watchers and the Giants mentioned in the Book of Enoch are not merely ancient stories. In Africa, oral traditions keep alive the narratives of these celestial beings who once walked among men, sharing wisdom and power. These stories are not just myths. They are part of a spiritual heritage that continues to influence the practices and beliefs of their descendants. What few realize is that this ancient knowledge can manifest itself in subtle ways, such as a heightened intuition or a spiritual sensitivity that seems innate. Reality shows that, for those who have African ancestry, these connections are not mere coincidences. They are a call to recognize and explore the spiritual heritage that runs through your veins. In African cultures, respect for ancestors and the belief that they are always present is fundamental. Not only does this provide a sense of identity and belonging, but it also offers a source of strength and guidance in times of need. Western science is just beginning to understand what these cultures they have always known. that the past lives within us, shaping who we are and who we can become. Analysis indicates that accepting this heritage is not a matter of choice, but of recognition. What you do with this knowledge and connection is the real challenge. While many may ignore or dismiss these sensations and intuitions as simple coincidences, others choose to embrace them, using them as a spiritual compass to navigate through life. The question is, are you willing to explore and value that part of yourself that is an echo of your ancestors? Perhaps in doing so, you will not only find answers about your past, but also new understanding and direction for the future. History reveals that African spiritual traditions did not disappear, but were kept alive by those who refused to let them die. Through the ages, even under the shadow of colonization and oppression, ancestral practices have persisted, sustained by a network of cultural resistance that refuses to be erased. The Watchers, almost mythical figures full of meanings intertwined with human destiny, were not just remembered, they were lived. African mothers, in whispers that spanned generations, perpetuated the knowledge of the Orixas, Voduns, and Inkwisis, transforming their stories into weapons of cultural preservation. What few realize is that this silent resistance was also an act of rebellion against the forces that sought to dehumanize and suppress African identity. The Babalorixas, true guardians of collective memory, carried the weight of centuries of wisdom in their minds and hearts, ensuring that even when sacred texts were burned, knowledge was not lost. In every corner of the African diaspora, griots, traditional storytellers and historians, played a crucial role, orally transmitting the myths and teachings that form the backbone of African spirituality. It turns out that as the modern world desperately searches for meaning and identity, these traditions are resurfacing with unexpected force. They do not represent a threat, but rather the completeness of a history that has been fragmented by dominant narratives. African spirituality is not just an addition to the global understanding of the sacred, it is an integral part of the spiritual origin of humanity. In this scenario, the Watchers and their stories represent more than figures from the past. They are symbols of a timeless resistance that manifests itself in each new spiritual awakening. Evidence suggests that this renewal is not just a return to the past, but a modern reinterpretation that enriches and challenges the status quo. In a world increasingly aware of the limitations of imposed truths, voices that were previously silenced find new means of expression. Ancient rituals, such as initiation ceremonies and festivals in honor of the Orixas, are being revitalized, not just as acts of faith, but as declarations of identity and cultural survival. Traditional events that celebrate deities such as Zango and Oxum are today symbols of resistance and rebirth, strengthening communities and inspiring new generations to seek their spiritual roots. Research shows that the African diaspora, which carried fragments of these traditions across the Atlantic, plays a crucial role in this renaissance. In the Candomblé terreiros of Brazil, the Santeria circles of Cuba, and the voodoo rituals of Haiti, African spiritual practices adapted and evolved, but never lost their essential core. They continue to serve as a bridge between the past and the future, offering guidance and solace in an often alienating world. Analysis indicates that the resurgence of these traditions is also a response to the search for authenticity in times of globalization. Instead of getting lost in cultural homogenization, African spiritual practices reaffirm their relevance and offer a new worldview, where connection with the divine is a personal and collective experience. This rediscovery is not just a return to roots, but a breakthrough in understanding what it means to be human. The question that arises then is, are we ready to embrace this spiritual heritage as an integral part of human history and not as an exotic addendum? The challenge is to integrate these traditions into the global narrative without diluting them, recognizing the value they bring to understanding our place in the cosmos. It is a call to every individual seeking meaning and connection to hear the stories that still resonate in the songs of the griots and the words whispered by generations past. The real question is, are we ready to let these truths, so long silenced, finally find their place in the modern world?